Hello, this is the second part of Chapter 9. This is the part that focuses on what you need to know for the quiz. And remember, Chapter 9 is focused on social emotional development in early childhood. So here is a quote from a 3-year-old who answered this question: "Who are you?" "I'm almost 3 years old, and I live in a big house with my mother and father and my brother Jason and my sister Lisa. I have blue eyes and a kitty that is orange and a television in my own room. I can run really fast. I like pizza and I have a teacher at preschool. I can count up to 100. Want to hear? I love my dog Skipper. I can climb to the top of the jungle gym. I'm not scared. I'm never scared. I'm always happy. I have brown hair and go to preschool." So this question and its answer helps us understand how young children in preschool years view themselves. And there are 5 main characteristics of how they understand themselves during preschool years. There's a bit of confusion of themselves, their mind, and their body, which usually means the head described along with many material dimensions such as size, shape, and color. And this is kind of indicated in the tadpole people we saw in the physical development chapter. They focus on details that you can actually see or concrete or actually hear when they recite it to you. Concrete descriptions like, "I know my ABCs, I can count, and I live in a big house." They talk about physical descriptions. They distinguish themselves by others by their physical and material attributes. And then they describe themselves in terms of activities such as play, as we saw in the previous description. And they have unrealistic positive overestimations of their abilities, and they really think that they can do the impossible, like in the previous description. She's never scared. She doesn't get scared. And so that's how young children understand themselves in early childhood. So they also have, related to what we just mentioned, they have a positivity bias. They describe themselves in terms of an overconfidence, which lends itself to a child's sense of initiative and motivation and to try new tasks despite the fact that they fail often. And so this overconfidence is tied to Piaget's egocentrism that we talked about related to pre-operational thought. And we're going to talk in a little bit about Erikson's stage, psychosocial stage for young children. And so the role of parental praise of children's efforts and storytelling of children's positive actions, this really helps them kind of ground themselves, and parents can reinforce that confidence that they have, and that will actually motivate them to take initiative. And we'll talk about that when we talk about Erikson. So what are self-esteem and self-concept? Sometimes the terms self-esteem and self-concept are used interchangeably, or they're not precisely defined. And so for our purposes in this class, self-esteem refers to a person's self-worth or self-image, their global evaluation of themselves. And this is really based on how they are treated by other people. So how other children treat them or how adults treat them. Self-concept is really about the domain-specific evaluations of themselves, like how confident are they in sharing? How competent are they as a friend? How competent are they in using the playground equipment? So having high self-esteem and a positive self-concept are really important aspects of children's well-being. And so this really comes from this high self-esteem and positive self-concept really comes from parent-child interactions in infancy and early childhood. And this is really important for them to be able to trust their environment and to be autonomous. And sometimes these self-esteem and self-concept, as we mentioned before, doesn't always match with what's reality. And so here we are at the two theories related to identity and social emotional development, and categorized together. Freud and Erikson are psychoanalytic theories, but when you look at each one of them separately, Freud's theory is a psychosexual theory, and Erikson is a psychosocial theory. Freud, again, really focuses on the id, the meeting appropriate immediate needs, and that's why and pleasure, and that's why he's called psychosexual. And so Freud's stage is phallic for preschoolers, and their pleasure or immediate needs from the id are centered on knowledge of being male and female and what's expected and what they're like. So they're really interested in what female body parts are and what male body parts are, but they're not in a sexual way, as you might think if you think about the name of the theory, psychosexual, but they're just wondering about the differences. And so that's part of why in preschool programs they don't have doors on the stalls, and the bathroom area is very open, so that children can discover those things, and they might experiment in regards to what it's like to be a boy or a girl. So girls might try out standing to urinate like boys do, or boys might try out sitting to urinate like girls do, just to see what it's like. Another reason why there aren't doors on the bathroom stalls too, though, is that they play with the doors and fingers get pinched and children get locked in. And so it's a safety issue, but it's also a developmental issue. For Erikson, remember, his focus is the ego and how social interactions affect our identity. And so during this stage then, Erikson says if a child had the positive outcomes of developing trust in infancy and autonomy in toddlerhood, then when they reach the preschool years, they're going to be able to take initiative because they'll be able to trust their environment and they'll be independent enough to come up with exciting plans. So they develop and carry out plans such as block structures or dramatic play activities. And so our role as adults is to help them understand that it's okay to take initiative, but they have to start thinking about others when they do it. And again, this goes back to Piaget's cognitive theory that they're really focused on themselves and egocentric, and so our role is to help them get beyond that. So Erikson's stage for preschool children is initiative versus guilt. And if we don't remind them about others in a positive way, they're going to feel guilty about taking initiative and they'll stop doing that. So some other components of identity that is developed during the preschool years is gender identity. And so children identify as male or female between the ages of 2 and 7. And at the younger end of that, they might claim that today they're going to be a boy, even though yesterday they were a girl. And so it might not be firmly established. And so here they are focused on the role of cultural norms, so what happens in their family, not only their immediate family, but their extended family, and then belief in permanency. By the time they get about 4.5, they determine what's permanent, and they don't change from their perceptions of what gender they are. And where does gender identity originate? Well, that comes from what they see in the media, from how their parents interact and talk with them, and what happens at school, and then their peers as well. There's also cognitive influence on gender, and just like Piaget talks about schemas, when we talk about cognitive development, there's a gender schema, and this is an interrelated set of beliefs, observations, and expectations about what male behavior should be and what female behavior should be. And so you can see this reflected in the young man's thoughts here. Because as they get closer to elementary school age and into elementary school, they really start focusing on interacting exclusively with their own gender, and this is called gender segregation. And then if we look at it as sociocultural, this is how the environmental factors shape gender attitudes and behaviors. And so let's look at culture in relation to child development. So keeping in mind that these are generalities or generalizations, and that we've artificially divided cultures into two groups here. There is one group that's individualist cultures, and the second is collectivist cultures. And so for individualistic cultures, the main goal is for individuals to become independent. And for collectivistic cultures, the main goal is for individuals to be interdependent with others. As we look at these two cultures, though, we have to keep in mind that there's nothing wrong or right about these, or more effective or less effective. Both types of cultures raise productive citizens and functional individuals. There are functional families within these cultures, but then there could also be dysfunctional families that don't do a very good job of raising productive citizens. And so an example of the individualistic culture would be the United States, and collectivist cultures would be Japan and other Asian cultures. And so let's talk about some characteristics. First of all, for individualistic cultures, parents encourage autonomy in early childhood. The focus is distinguishing yourself and being successful as an individual. And the emphasis is on the core self, and this core self remains stable across all settings. And so for collectivistic cultures with interdependence, there's less distinguishing of the self as an individual, and it's important to connect with others, and it's important to understand the self in relationship to others. So in both cultures, parents and families want children to be successful. In individualistic cultures, though, parents want children to be successful to benefit the individual child themselves, whereas in collectivistic cultures, Parents want children to be successful in order to benefit the family, the community, the culture itself. Something to keep in mind about culture as well, we may fit into a generalized category, but each of our families are different, and each of us as individuals are different. And so we want to keep in mind that even though you might be from Japan, an interdependence point of view may not fit with you or your family. So now let's talk about emotions. By the time a child is 12 to 18 months, they have established and been able to label and think about happiness and joy, sadness, anger, disgust, fear, and surprise. And hopefully adults have helped them label those emotions and then develop skills of how they can react in an appropriate way because of those emotions. By about 2, they start to develop self-conscious emotions, or emotions that are affected by how others view them, or self-esteem, such as shame, as if they're doing something that others don't approve of, guilt, embarrassment. And then on the opposite end of that spectrum, shame, guilt, and embarrassment are more negative self-conscious emotions. Empathy, or understanding and being sympathetic with other people, and pride, pride in doing something that society approves of. And so children, as we just mentioned, become sensitive to disappointing adults. And so shame is demonstrated by casting their eyes downward, their shoulders slump, and turning the corners of the mouth downward. And with embarrassment, they get a nervous smile, they avert their gaze, and they touch their face or body. Whenever these negative, culturally sensitive emotions appear, the body actually releases cortisol, and cortisol is released when there is stress. And so this is something to think about as an adult, and these negative emotions and how it might affect a child long term, if that's the approach an adult uses to shape behavior. Okay, so just like before, I'm going to pull these videos out so you can watch them separately. But now we're going to focus on sociodramatic play, which has to do with interacting with others as a child plays. So emotional regulation is the ability to modulate one's emotional arousal, and this regulation develops through a combination of biology, or the capabilities cognitively to deal with this, behaviorally, and then from their experience in the environment. This video focuses on an experiment using marshmallows and the ability of a child to delay gratification. And so it's quite interesting to see how preschool and young school age children try to control their desire to eat a marshmallow. So look at the video section after you look at this PowerPoint to see how they control themselves, or try to, in regards to getting 1 marshmallow versus 2 marshmallows. Okay, so then focusing on play, Play is a pleasurable activity that's engaged in for its own sake, and social play is one type of play. And when you look at the video, you can see an example of sociodramatic play. So the functions of play is that it contributes to cognitive and social emotional development. It allows children to actively explore and discover and interact with others. It develops directly cognitive developmental levels directly are impacted by the way children play and their opportunities to play. And really, for infants, toddlers, and preschoolers and early elementary school children, play is really the context of learning. It also helps children master their anxieties, conflict, and helps them make sense of life's occurrences. So if they see something on TV that doesn't make sense to them, they may act it out in a play scenario. And so that's why we want to allow them, even though it might become disruptive, to act out movies that they might see that have a lot of aggression in them, and we can help them figure out the appropriateness and inappropriateness of that as they're playing. It helps them work off physical energy and release pent-up tensions. And symbolic and make-believe play is especially beneficial because it allows them to try out different roles and experiment with situations of power. So it helps them experiment with what it's like to be a mom or a dad or a teacher. And also they could try out what it's like being a boy or a girl, whether that's the gender they are, or if they're just experimenting with what it might feel like to be the other gender. So as you might expect, Piaget, who focused on cognitive development, developed a theory in regards to children's play. And so he says that play begins as sensory motor play, and this using their senses and their motor skills, the children, as they play, develop mental pictures of mental representations of things in the environment, just like that's the first stage of cognitive development. Piaget says that that's the first stage of play. He also says that there's practice play, and this is repetitive behaviors where they develop new skills, such as stacking blocks. They may stack blocks over and over in the same way so that they can develop the skill of stacking blocks. Pretend and symbolic play is where a child transforms the physical environment into a symbol, such as using a rectangular block as a cell phone, substituting one object for another object, and acting towards them as if they were those other objects. Social play is play that involves social interactions with peers. And so sociodramatic play would be pretending to do something with another child. And sometimes in sociodramatic play, they actually work out scripts and talk about what each other should do, what they should say, and how they should act out a scenario. And then constructive play combines sensory motor and practice play together with symbolic representations of ideas. So there's 5 different types of play tied to Piaget's cognitive theory. And so rough and tumble play is play that's characterized by playful fighting and with positive emotions. And sometimes it can escalate to aggression, and then subside when someone protests. And when we talk about that, we're talking about the children themselves, but it's important for adults to monitor this, not to interrupt it from the very beginning, but make it so it's not a frustrating experience for children. So again, take a look at this video in the pulled out video section. So the social benefits of peer play is it offers experience in forming and maintaining relationships with others, and it takes on they can take on various roles within an activity. So they could be the powerful one and at one time, and another child would be the more passive participant, and then they could switch roles. It also offers children opportunities to negotiate and decide what they're going to do. So by 3.5 to 4, socio-dramatic play emerges, and children act in and direct their own little plays. There's frequent socio-dramatic play in preschool. Something to keep in mind before age 3.5, young children really need to play directly with adults to figure out how to do these dramatic play activities. And so we can give them some important information if we play directly with them. In sociodramatic play, they start developing their attention span. They can deepen their understanding of other people, and it advances levels of theory of mind performance. It helps them figure out and understand why other people do certain things that they do. Okay, so that's all of the information from Chapter 9 that might be on quiz number 2, along with what we talked about in the first section from assignment 2 as well. And so make sure you take a look at the videos that I pull out and put in a separate section for you. And then make sure you also do the Part 2 application assignment.